Usually, when people think about lost media, they often focus on the topics themselves and not so much the search that surrounds them, and sometimes that search can be a bigger story than the topic itself. This context can sometimes be missed when reading through articles on the Lost Media Wiki, and is one of the reasons why I like discussing lost media so much. In fact, the other day, I was browsing the Lost Media Wiki forums and came upon a thread I've read a couple times before, on how the community could get another big search going. The thread went on to state that it's been a long time since the likes of Clockman and A Day with SpongeBob, topics that took the internet by storm, and the question states how we could get that to happen again. While the replies discussed this topic in a variety of different ways, it got me to think about this from the opposite perspective. Just because there aren't any big searches going on, doesn't mean there aren't any searches happening at all. And that made me realize just how many searches were started and never finished, for how the progress on them hit a dead end. This doesn't include searches which are still ongoing, like Slamfest 99, with several leads and contacts to reach out to, but rather the searches that haven't been touched in a while and remain as unsolved cases, which is what we're going to take a look at today. Several of these topics are searches I've participated in before, and I'm looking forward to discussing the progress that has, or in this case, hasn't been made when it comes to them. Every time I think I've seen it all, a new piece of lost media comes out of nowhere that somehow no one has heard about before, and an entire search forms around it. These topics are really interesting to cover, and all it takes is one or two claims to get them going, which is exactly how I describe a more recent topic that was brought to my attention. It came from fellow Lost Media YouTuber Seeker of the Lost, and describes one of the strangest crossovers to ever exist. Oswald from The Nick Jr. Show and Ozzy Osbourne, the musical artist. The story goes that in the early 2000s, Nickelodeon created a crossover commercial which combined the two together in what is described as an ad for Oswald, but not with Oswald dialogue. Instead, the characters were dubbed over by the Osbournes, and even included a variety of bleeped out swear words. While this sounds like a crazy fan-made work, or something that simply can't exist, several claims have come forward spanning a couple years, which adds to the likelihood that many different people all saw the commercial. Some of the more consistent details include that it aired sometime between 2001 and 2003, contained voice clips from the Osbournes' TV show, and had a parody name at the end called The Oswalds or something similar. While no images were found, and the only evidence we have to work with were recollections, it was believed to have been aired during the Kids' Choice Awards in the early 2000s, which, if true, would mean it seems to be more of a skit and less of a commercial. Seeker and myself wasted no time in tracking down full recordings of the event from 2002 and 2003, but went through the whole tape and didn't find any mention of Oswald or the Osbournes. I really thought the Kids' Choice Awards would have been the perfect place for it to air, so in case it did end up being a commercial or something like that, I did look through several commercial compilations from that time as well, but came up empty-handed. This is where things get a little hard to follow, because the only other leads to work with were people that state it might have been from Teen Nick, while others state it was aired during the daytime, and most of the Reddit posters were contacted but provided little information that wasn't already there. This is definitely not something that you can just contact Nickelodeon over, and that means it's going to have to reappear on a VHS tape or re-upload of something. I do believe it exists, and it makes a lot of sense that it would, especially with the timeline in question. Oswald on Nick Jr. and the Osbournes TV show on MTV, who are both owned by Viacom, were at their peak in the early 2000s. So such a parody having been made makes sense from that standpoint, especially during a special event like the Kids' Choice Awards, or a late-night audience. It's just confusing that it wasn't actually in the Kids' Choice Awards, and also isn't something that Nickelodeon could just air all the time, especially with the bleeped-out swearing. I've been hoping ever since Seeker's video went up that someone would find a recording and it would just appear, but that hasn't happened yet, and the topic has gotten pretty old to the point that there's not even a whole lot of discussion about it anymore. This is a parody I'd really like to see for myself, so check those VHS tapes and hopefully it can be archived. For some reason, lost media related to children's shows remains one of the most popular categories, and there have always been good search efforts surrounding topics from this category. I'm not sure if it's specifically the creation of children's content that I find interesting, or maybe just the nostalgia, but this is an area of lost media that I enjoy as well, and have covered several mysteries before. However, there was another search for a kids show that got really popular and was discussed heavily in the forums, but little progress has been made in the search and several unanswered questions remain. In December 2020, a thread was made on the Lost Media Wiki forums, which was titled Charlie Version of Caillou, and goes on to describe an alternate version of the kids show that aired briefly on demand, which has no information online. Needless to say, the initial reactions were that of OP having misremembered the entire thing, or that they had confused Caillou with another show that looked visually similar, called Charlie and Mimo. But more context was added to explain the details that were previously mentioned. Apparently, the show had no other change to it other than Caillou being renamed to Charlie, and was airing simultaneously with the Caillou series we're familiar with, which is why the difference was so noticeable. Also mentioned were the fact that OP had been located in Indiana at the time, and saw Charlie more than once, to the point where they looked it up online at the time, but found nothing about this alternate version even back then. It's one thing when content goes missing, and the search to get it found is difficult, but it's another when a piece of lost media can't even accurately be identified, and adds another layer to the mystery. At this point, I was already hooked and started thinking about possibilities for why it could have existed in the first place, with an early theory being that it was some kind of altered version that aired on local stations to avoid copyright from PBS, while some other users suggested it was a foreign language dub. Though these theories were debunked fairly quickly when OP confirmed that they were both airing on PBS channels at the time, just that the Charlie version had been through a different channel provided by Comcast or Xfinity TV. The most important note, however, was that the narrator who sang the Caillou theme song also sang the Charlie one, meaning that she would be someone who would likely remember the details about it, in addition to any of the voice actors that might have been recast from the original show. But this is where things get a little complicated, as tracking down those voice actors is nearly impossible. We looked into a few of them, and while some don't seem to have any social media presence, the other ones have unfortunately passed away. Caillou is such an old show anyway, and these voice actors don't seem to have a lot of credit to their name, so it's possible they wouldn't remember anyway. I thought about the idea of looking into PBS stations and finding some people who helped run them, but the thing is, we're not even sure which PBS station this was, and if it was on an Xfinity channel, the results would be even smaller. There wasn't any progress made after that in attempts to connect with anyone from PBS, but another theory was proposed that Caillou was renamed to Charlie as a way to test market the show to a new audience, But I disagree with this and don't believe it was part of a test or something that wasn't meant to be released publicly. Even though we haven't uncovered any leads to follow with this search, I definitely think it's one of those things that could be out there, and it'll just take the right lead to come forward with something we can work with. Anyone who's familiar with animation, or the history of content from the likes of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, is probably familiar with the idea of lost episodes or adult interpretations for these classics. While many of them aren't actually true, despite popular belief, there are a couple cartoon pilots that actually were more adult than their final product. Jimmy Two Shoes fits this description and was a kids' cartoon that aired on Teletoon and Disney XD for a couple years in the late 2000s, before its cancellation. But the origins of its creation date back even further to the mid-2000s. In contrast to the plot of the final cartoon, which has Jimmy spreading happiness in the town of Miseryville, the plot to the pilot of the series has Jimmy being hit by a bus and accidentally being sent to hell, where he finds the best in everything as he doesn't know where he is. While some concept art exists from this early version of the cartoon, I wanted to see the animation, and set out on a big search to do just that, having no idea what I was getting myself into. I've searched for many lost pilots before, and know by now that the best places to look are with the creators and very early crew members, either from concept art designs or Season 1 episodes. There were a couple names attached to the concept art I found, and some early crew members who were really easy to contact, so I sent them all messages and heard back pretty quickly, but unfortunately with few leads to follow. Most of them either didn't remember the pilot or had no content from it, and it was mentioned that one of the possible reasons for this is that Jimmy Two Shoes was originally funded by investors, and once the project was picked up, that pilot animation became their property, which got me thinking about Teletoon and the network side of things rather than the creators, and the possibility that someone from the network where it aired might have been involved with the series being picked up. This was essentially another round of making contacts, as now I had to find a bunch of Teletoon executives and producers who were involved with programming around the time Jimmy Two Shoes was being pitched. I finally found someone on Facebook, and after a while got a response. He didn't know exactly what I was talking about, but knew of the show and offered to help, by suggesting I reach out to his boss, who was more directly involved with original content at Teletoon. This felt like the end of the search, as I had made my way up the ladder and hit what was pretty much the top. A programming director just told me to contact a programming executive that was involved with original content. I sent him one message and waited a while, tried again through another one of his social media accounts, and waited longer, until I decided it might be best to ask the programming director himself if there was a better way to reach out to the executive. The director said they were friends on Facebook and would send him a message on my behalf, which sounded really promising. But again, I waited, checked in with the director, only to confirm the executive hadn't replied, and have been waiting ever since to no response. Even if the executive never saw the director's message, I don't think his Facebook account is a reliable way to reach him, but that leaves me out of options, and it's been so long since I made those contacts that I think this lead has dried up. I'm really disappointed that all the previous searching has kind of put me back at the beginning, and this is a topic that I'll have to get back to when I find the motivation for it. Before I get to the final topic of the video, I'd like to give a little shout out to a search that hasn't necessarily been ongoing or consistent, but still fits the theme of having little to no progress made over the past few years. JBVO is a cartoon request show that aired on Cartoon Network for about a year in the early 2000s, and while the majority of the series remains missing, there was one episode from the show that everyone wanted to find. It involved one caller's particular request for Johnny Bravo to play an episode of Dragon Ball Z during the block, which unfortunately he couldn't do, as the 30-minute episode length was too long. So instead, he increased the speed of the episode itself and commentated over it. This topic had actually remained an urban legend with no proof it actually existed until I made a video on it back in 2017 and people started looking for it. Surprisingly, only 1 month after I made my video, VHS archivist Captain Bizarre found a short clip on a tape he had recently acquired, which confirmed its existence. However, the clip is all that was recovered, and to this day, the full episode is still missing, along with the majority of JBVO episodes, as they allegedly never re-aired. Even the Lost Media Wiki has videos from the show that are no longer available. While this topic is without a doubt one of the classics within the community, its age is also one of the reasons why less people are interested in it. Finding episodes on home-recorded VHS tapes is one of the best ways to get this found, so you might want to check your collection for recordings of this show too. If there was ever a perfect example of a search with 0 leads and 0 progress being made, I think Hitogata would be it. Surprisingly, it's a topic I've never discussed on the channel before, and maybe it's for its vague and unconfirmed existence that didn't hold my interest. But after popping into the On the Hunt channel for this topic, in the Lost Media Wiki Discord server, I am very intrigued by the search. Not so much because I want to find it, but because I've never seen a piece of lost media become more lost after a search for it has begun. In case you haven't heard of it before, Hitogata refers to a Japanese PSA that aired late at night between the late 90s and early 2000s. It's become famous for its unsettling appearance, with a description of 2 white humanoids appearing on screen, before one fades out and the other fades in, while the sound of a railroad crossing sign can be heard, which has led people to believe that this was an ad to encourage railroad safety. Despite the popularity this topic has gained over the past couple years, its origins are sourced back to an anonymous Japanese message board in 2004. But many claims about sightings and its existence have been made since, because currently, there is actually no evidence that this PSA ever even existed. While there have been many different stories about the visuals, where it was used or when it aired, there have been just as many questions about whether or not it's real. This topic is commonly referred to as an urban legend, and there have been several Japanese commercials and PSAs that have resurfaced and led some to believe Hitogata doesn't exist as most people believe, but rather it's a combination of people misremembering different Japanese commercials, which is where the search itself gets very messy and hard to follow. Ever since the topic gained popularity outside of Japan, there have been more claims and more possibilities about what it could be that makes finding any actual details about it so much more difficult. Re-uploads of visually similar commercials and fan recreations have confused people into believing they found the real PSA. In fact, one of the only pieces of evidence that we can use to our benefit is a chart which recorded every sighting of Hitogata across Japan and the dates when the sighting allegedly took place. This helps narrow in on a time frame for when it could have aired, or which part of Japan we should be looking in. But the only way to really find success at this would be to locate a VHS tape from that era, and when it comes to Japan, they don't really record things from TV like we do in the US. People have purchased VHS tape lots from Japan and looked through them, but nothing of note has come from that, and to me, there seems to be a very small chance Hitogata would be on them in the first place. There are a few Japanese PSA and marketing companies that have allegedly been contacted too, but denied having made any shorts similar to Hitogata's description. Daikate from the Lost Media Wiki was planning on sending his own letter to them asking about Hitogata as well. However, that hasn't happened yet. I haven't been following this search too closely, but after catching myself up on what's become speculation at this point, I can't believe how little progress can be made. Not only for the topic itself, but all the problems that have come with its popularity. It might seem overly optimistic to think that someday these pieces of lost media will just reappear, or someone will find a Japanese PSA compilation on YouTube and realize Hitogata is in there. But there's always a chance for things like that to happen, and with lost media, you never really know how something is going to get found. Stranger things have happened before. Though it does feel a little unfortunate when there are those times where you can't progress a search very much because of a lack of leads or finding a dead end. However, I've always said that even if there's nothing to necessarily find in a search, you can definitely still contribute to discussion, which helps keep the interest going, and sometimes that can be enough. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other game-related lost media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.